Mainstream media is always out there trying to break the news, but here at Thought Crimes with Kevin Knuckles, we're breaking the news. Like, share, subscribe.
Dr. Ash, let me ask you a question. Earlier today, you talked about this came from the lab, and the question is it just a leak from the lab, or is it a bioweapon? And I want you to talk to us about that, because I think the assumption for most of us has been it's a leak from the lab, but you're the one who raised the bioweapon. You brought up that term, and you've been at the State Department. I think you were at the State Department for over 25 years.
In and out.
In and out, educated at Oxford and Cornell. You know a little something about all this stuff. Tell me your answer to, was it just a lab leak or was it a bioweapon?
They were working on a program related to synthetic biology and gain of function using the serial passage evolutionary or convolutionary technology approaches. Quite publicly, actually, that they had said in their 2011 Declaration of the Biological Weapons Convention and other places, including speeches by their generals, was related to their future of warfare, of hybrid warfare. So, of course, they were working on dual-use research of concern. It's called DIRC. And the DIRC, in this case, again, if it gets out of a lab and it's not contained promptly, could result in a weapons-like release. Okay, whether they deliberately did it is, I have very little sense they did. But were they deliberately working on developing the capability to use advanced pathogenetic capabilities of war in a way that no one's seen ever employed? Yeah, they were. Of course they are. That's what the Chinese have been talking about publicly. So, I mean, there shouldn't be any surprise here. I just don't know why no one paid attention to it.
What, you didn't know? It's no surprise. Everyone knows.
Finally, if I could, Mr. Chairman, last question is, I think earlier when I was not, had to go vote, Dr. Gerard, you mentioned something about human DNA and American going to China. So I didn't catch that. Could you fill me in?
So Dr. Asher talked about export controls for biotechnology, and I know he knows this as well or better than I do, but it's not just technology, but it's information, and our genetic information is actually critical. And I do assess that the Chinese have set up circumstances that they're doing a lot of our gene sequencing of Americans that are through normal labs or even through studies at the NIH. And they're doing that for a reason, and that genetic sequences are powerful. They know our vulnerabilities. It is the first step in devising a potentially ethnic weapon, as was discussed by Dr. Asher. And similarly, I don't know if it's still the case, but I believe it is, you're not going to see any genetic sequences of Chinese exported out of the country. That was a law. There's a reason for that. And when we talk about export of technology, export of our genetic information may be the most important key that we need to stop.
Now try to keep in mind while you're listening to this that Google, Facebook, YouTube, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, nobody wants you to know this.
Well, I want to make sure I understand this. So American genetic information is going to China. The same China that Dr. Asher talked about is doing bioweapon research with this stuff, and you're saying that combination is of particular concern.
Oh, it is an absolutely huge concern from where I sit. And again, I've been out of the formal bioweapons defense, part of the government for a period of time, but genetic information is very powerful, right? It decides who we are. It tells us about our vulnerabilities, not only disease states, but potential for genetic weapons. And what I mean by that is there are variations in receptors and other things that vary by populations, and those can potentially be exploited so that a new pathogen would differentially target a race, a European ancestry versus someone else. And we are essentially just giving all that information to China in the context of what I do believe is an unprecedented and
what's
terrifying.
The rationale for giving that to China? I mean, I think that's a fundamental question we got to ask on all this. Why are we giving all this information to China?
Because most people in the community are either naive to the threat, they deny the threat, they're oblivious to the threat, or just don't want to think about it.
Oh, I'm sorry, what's that?
And that's my assessment of many of the people involved in research. It's not that they're evil, it's not they're giving it to them, but they don't just understand what is happening in China and other places.
Wow.
And we're providing this in a naive fashion across the board. And I just wanted to point out that genetic information, and again, I hope Dr. Dasher would agree with this, but genetic information is one of those things that, we should be keeping as a vital national security secret, and not providing it to adversary nations who wish to develop weapons, even openly in the literature.
If I could make a comment on this.
I'm at the mercy of the chair right now, but I'll leave it up.
Dr. Clay,
Just because I know exactly what he's saying, but I think I want to say it in another way. So if you go on the internet and want to do, you can do DNA tests for almost anything on the internet as a consumer, and you don't even need, a doctor to sign. And you do a scrape, you do a spit. The specimen will very often go to a laboratory here, but then it gets shipped to BGI, which Dr. Asher will say bought more Illumina sequencing machines than any place in the world, and so they will do the sequence there, and they'll send it back to the company. But guess what? They'll keep a copy, and that's what he's talking about. So every time in America, not always, but many times you will do what you think is, and you'll go to a U.S. address, and then it gets shipped to BGI.
Move to China. Later.
It's not very tasteful.